Welcome to the 38th session of the Permanent Committee on Foreign Affairs and International Development of the House of Commons. We are here pursuant to Standing Order 1082 of the regulations and the motion adopted through the committee on Thursday, February the 12th, 2026. This motion, the committee is now carrying out a piece of research on the review on Canada's Indo-Pacific strategy.
Panel today, it is Professor Cahouette, full professor of political science and Asian studies at the Université de Montréal, and Professor Martel, associate professor, Department of Political Studies at Queen's University. Each witness will be given 5 minutes for their opening statement, after which we will proceed with questions and comments from members of the committee. Madame Martel, vous avez la parole.
Mrs. Martel, you have the floor.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. Here, je ferai mes remarques en anglais.
I'll actually be speaking in English, and I'll be available to answer questions in both official languages today.
Effectively, I think, by several other expert witnesses on this committee, but I do want to amplify what I see as a pretty broad consensus within the expert community that the Indo-Pacific strategy already gets a lot of things right when it comes to increased Canadian presence and beginning to overcome our capacity, reputational, and knowledge deficits in and on the region, including, of course, by putting additional resources where our mouth is. So it should be clear to this committee that core objectives of the strategy cannot reasonably be expected to be met within a 5-year period. But this first phase has no doubt moved the needle in the right direction on balance. Still, there remains significant room for improvement of what needs to be, in my view, a flexible approach that sends a coherent message, but also allows breathing room to adjust over time. And I want to make 2 key points here that can hopefully inform this next phase. The first one is we should keep calm and carry on when it comes to more win-win cooperative aspects of the Indo-Pacific strategy, particularly when it comes to our successes in security-focused initiatives where we can actually make a difference, have added value to offer, and can meet regional demand. And key examples for me here include dark vessel detection, maritime domain awareness, combating illegal and unregulated fishing, but also disaster relief, non-proliferation, countering violent extremism, capacity building and peacekeeping and conflict mediation, among others. And these are issue areas that have received far less attention than clean energy, technology, supply chains, food security, critical minerals. And yet, this is also where we've been able to contribute in very concrete, and I would add more sustainable ways, and where we can better align the IPS with the comprehensive approach of our regional partners on national and regional security, and cutting across those unhelpful divides between security, the economy, and I would add social development. So these contributions may not make as great a headline or a photo op than Operation Horizon, although it could with a little more effort. But they have way more impact than we think in the long term, not only for people's lives, but also for the Canadian brand and in a much more cost-effective way. So in this context, I feel strongly that Canada's support to ongoing regional efforts that are associated with, for instance, the implementation of the Women, Peace and Security agenda in the region should not be downgraded, but instead carry over this next phase. And then the second point I wish to make is there is, in my view, some room for adjustment in the more zero-sum dimensions of the Indo-Pacific strategy, particularly when it comes to mitigating some of the effects of China's rise that may conflict with Canadian interests or values and those of our key allies and partners. So obviously, this is where the most substantial change from the initial formulation of the IPS to whatever phase 2.0 is going to look like needs to happen. Also, of course, against the backdrop of our evolving relationship with the United States and the broader moment we find ourselves in. But ultimately, and as others have suggested, this is really about the way we approach like-mindedness in a broader sense. A value-informed, pragmatic approach to like-mindedness requires more than just categorizing each country as like or unlike overall, of course, but it should also be more than adjusting that distinction to specific issue areas. What we actually need to be doing is look at what specific aspects of a country's behavior within each particular issue area aligns or clashes with our interests and values, and to what extent, and then locate where it makes sense for Canada to draw the line by coordinating with others. Describing China as an increasingly disruptive power then and now as a strategic partner creates confusion on the part of our partners that our foreign service is now painstakingly trying to clear up, but that's only because we came out with that kind of oversimplistic labeling in the first place to speak to a very particular low moment in the relationship and now have to adjust to reality.
Okay.
So
just if you could wrap up quickly.
Yes, absolutely. So this is the exact opposite of the kind of really granular approach, ideally, that we would need to take to distinguish facts from noise and to strategize accordingly, and not just when it comes to China, but also ideally every country we name more than once in the IPS. And I hope the next phase of the IPS can do something to remedy that. Thank you.
Okay, merci, madame. Monsieur Cahouette.
Thank you, ladies. Mrs. Martel, Mr. Cahouette, you have 5 minutes. And you have the floor. Et vous êtes en sourdine.
Merci. Bonjour à nouveau.
Thank you. Well, I have my presentation in French, but I can answer questions in both official languages.
With what my predecessor mentioned, ce que Stéphanie a dit, et je voudrais vous ramener un peu au contexte de l'émergence de cette politique.
And I would like to talk about the context in which this policy has emerged, this Indo-Pacific policy in 2021. So with colleagues, identified 5 challenges in 2021, 5 challenges for Canada. The first was to come good with the promise, and the second one was how to manage the relationship with the United States, and the third one was how to promote it internationally, and the fourth one was how to promote multilateralism for Canada, and 5 was to rethink relationships with China. This was in 2021, before the launch of the IPC, which was then launched in the following year. Since, as was mentioned by my colleague, the idea was to have a 5-year strategy with quite strong financial means, 3 billion, around 3 areas: safety, commercial and investment, and then ensuring people create links, green future, and making Canada a committed partner to the Indo-Pacific region. Let's talk about what has been accomplished. And I believe also that what Mrs. Martel has just talked about really comes back to the same line of thought. Canada has multiplied its presence in the region in a substantial way. It's also increased high-level visibility and recommendations that would have been set up to say that for Indo-Pacific partners, the representation of high-level representatives was important for political reasons and for perception reasons. Canada has also improved its presence in regional fora, so they're now present in regional fora in Southeast Asia as well, and in the ASEAN region, and building more solid partnerships and strategic partnerships. We talked about this earlier, and creating outlets for investment, and several actions have been put in place, strengthening the presence of national defense among each other with the participation and use of joint exercises and initiatives to detect these dark vessels. So climate change, fighting that, supporting civil society and security. Now, what are the results and the perceptions? And I would like to say that in the region, the states are one thing, but perceptions are already important, and perception is very important, especially in Asia, in the Asia region and in Indo-Pacific, because they have a long-term memory of what has happened, and the states and the diplomats will therefore refer to what happened and was done in the past. So this idea of perception is also very important. So yes, there is participation in military exercises, so detecting dark vessels, for example, but I suggest that Canada is still a minor partner in this. And I would like to ask if we've really understood our added value. I would say that it's not because there's no commitment, but that we're spread too thin on the ground. Now, secondly, is trade. We have links with Japan and China over the past 12 months. We've been able to relaunch economic relationships with India and China. And while we were launching the IPC, there were important tensions with China, and also new tensions with the two regional superpowers in Southeast Asia. We have also strengthened our relationships and links, but I would like to tell the committee that the trade balance is still advantageous for the region. It's 2-to-1 for the Southeast Asia region. What's positive is that the increase in importations from Canada to the region is slightly quicker than the actual than before, and so it's developing positively. It's going in the right direction. As far as investing in people and knitting relationships, I would like to underline that many delegations have been sent, but but it's difficult to give data. Before 2024, there was a delegation of approximately 300 people with the Minister for Trade. Was it necessary to have 300 people? It was a massive delegation. Why not a more targeted delegation? So would it not be a better idea to have more targeted interventions? In terms of perception, there are also contradictions that have emerged over the past 2 years between our IPC strategy and the changes in immigration policies in terms of the thresholds for immigration. And, of course, people have said or have asked me what's happening with Canada. I'll continue. Now, building a sustainable future based on green and sustainable environment, I would like to underline that the fact that the credibility of Canada and the perception of Canada is lessening internally and also abroad with the pushbacks on climate change and on the environment. Would you mind wrapping up, Mr. Cowett? Thank you. So it's very important, of course, in the region, but there are inconsistencies, and it's something that still remains a problem. So to conclude, how do we foresee the future? I think Canada needs to really take responsibility for its position, and that's before the pre-Canada declarations. They need to create international links, but they need to be responsible for this role. And the question is, has Canada the means to fulfill its ambitions? And does the renegotiation of the agreement with the United States, the CUSMA agreement, will it encourage the development in Indo-Pacific? And I would say say the same thing as my colleague. We need to do this in a much more structured and targeted way from a military point of view and for civil society. So we set our marks, but we need more targeted policies, and we need to avoid contradictions, for example, for immigration and the environment. And I'll stop there. Thank you, Mr. Cowett. We now have 44 minutes for questions or comments from members of the committee, and we're going to begin with Mr. Abu Taif. Thank you very much, Chair, and welcome to our witnesses.
You made when we talk about Indo-Pacific is a beautiful short name for a very powerful region, geographically, politically, economically, and demographically. And a region that we deal with, but we must be considering to set a ground that is going to make it good for Canada and for the region, continue to have those relationships. It's very crucial. We have some calls to evolve, to have an evolution rather than to have reinvention as far as our approach to the Indo-Pacific. We know that there is Indo-Pacific strategy that's set by our current government. The question to both of you, and maybe I'll start with Dr. Martel. The question is, are you convinced that the base point of starting the strategy and looking into the region, is that good enough? Is that a set for reinvention, or is that set for evolution? I would like the comments from both of you, and again, I'll start with Dr. Martel.
I think evolution is probably the right way to put it. As I mentioned, and as others have, there is a lot of things that the IPS as it is actually does right. And I think to amplify, the comment made by Professor Cahouette, this is also about, I think, evolution in a way that allows for more flexibility to adjust to changing conditions and a complex reality, instead of being so focused on the short term. I think, a way to also approach possibly the evolution of the strategy to reconcile inconsistencies within the strategy is to have a better grasp at how the various subregions, the various parts of the strategy are interconnected, right? So one initiative that might go very well, in one particular subregion or be very well received in one particular country or one particular group of stakeholders might not have the same effects elsewhere and with another group of stakeholders. And I think this is where warding ourselves from the kind of blanket characterizations of certain countries might actually be somewhere where we might be able to adjust. I think it's very, the kind of signaling that this sends is something that is not needed to actually for the Indo-Pacific and strategy in Canada to define the facts around a particular relationship, but without creating unnecessary burden that needs to be backpedaled after the fact.
Professor Cahouette, please.
Yeah, I think I would agree with what is just being said. But I would say, I think there's part of reinvention that is also there. I think it's mostly evolution or specialization that would say it's most important. But I think we have to partly reinvent our relation now with China and also with India. I think we need to be consistent with the idea that the world as we know it, or as we've known it since the end of World War II, has changed. We have tectonic plates have moved, so we are in a different setting. So that's part of it where I'm using the expression reinvention. I think evolution, I would agree with what was said, but I would say that we need to make sure there's consistency in our policy. So, and this is what I was mentioning because of the idea of perception. Perception matters in diplomacy, and the perception of inconsistency or contradictory policy is something that people might brought up. And I think, so this is diminishing number of inconsistency or contradiction. And two, I think this first phase allowed us to discover more affinities with certain countries. I think these should be reinforced. For example, Japan, Korea, South Korea. But also we need to learn, so reinforcing affinities, but learn that, for example, in Southeast Asia, you have a country like Indonesia, which is quite close to Canada, that conducted military exercise with Russia not 2 months ago. So it seemed incredible or very contradictory, but it makes sense within the Indonesian context. Malaysia took a strong position in supporting Palestine, which was very strongly, not the only one doing it, but one of the few in the region. So we need to understand the context that we're dealing with, that the action may not mean the same thing if you're based in Canada or if you're based in the region. So I think learning and deepening our understanding of these different societies and blocks are crucial. And I think that's what Stéphanie Martel was just saying.
Besides putting more efforts and resources there, how best Canada can navigate this relationship in a very complex, very diverse, very rich region? In a quick, I've got about 10, 20 seconds maybe left.
Who should go first?
Yeah, Professor Martel, go ahead.
Thank you. I think one thing that we can do is find a way to better leverage the higher education sector. And I preach for my, my own domain here. But there are several ways that we can do that I think can support the IPS better. So beyond limited ad hoc support to one-off, specific initiatives, being able to develop the kind of bridging the gap network that is dedicated to the IPS and brings in a broader, panel of experts, of people from government, the business sector, civil society, and having those conversations that we're having right now in a more sustained way would be a great idea. Another way, a very concrete initiative that we could consider would be and building on the successes of the Canada-ASEAN scholarships program, being able to offer scholarships to graduate students or postdoctoral researchers to come and study in Canada and therefore build, not only understanding across, Canada and the region, but also contribute to building the kind of expertise that we desperately need in this country in this moment would be a much better way than to support, a few undergraduate students to enjoy the Canadian winter for, a couple of months.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Clark, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Thank you to our witnesses for being here today and for offering your expertise on this really important subject. And Professor Martel, I'll just mention I appreciated the end of your last answer there. I'm an MP from the Halifax area, and we have one of the highest rates of per capita institutions and students in the country. So I certainly take your point on the value there. I think one of the commonalities between both of you on your opening statements was the need for more granularity in kind of this evolution of the strategy, not looking at things as a binary, black, white, good, bad type approach, which makes a lot of sense to me. So I'll start with you, Professor Martel, and then perhaps Professor Cahouette-Pressat. Just if you could give us some examples that stand out to you of areas where we might be able to be a bit more fine-tuned on this as we evolve this strategy.
Right. So I'll probably draw from China-specific examples because I feel like this committee is particularly interested in those. And I'm not just as a professing my comments, I'm not a China expert, but there are a lot of really good ones in this country that you should be tapping into beyond, the immediately digestible, but perhaps not as nuanced type of analysis that has fed into the IPS so far. And I think when it comes to China, any serious research, that really narrows in on the actual granularity that you're describing will identify a broad spectrum of patterns, even within particular issue areas, right? So we can talk about, and in some ways, China will be of course, trying to shape the rules in accordance to its own interests and values in ways that will clash with our own. That's for sure. But there are also particular, aspects of China's current positioning as a global power where it is actually upholding the rules against, other actors, and I'm thinking of the U.S., of course, in particular, attempting to, revise or usurp those. So I think it's important to make room and have the kind of cognitive flexibility to allow for those possibilities. And of course, in between those, you'll have a full array of gray area, particular strategies and tactics And I think if we're able to better distinguish the facts from the noise here and really pinpoint exactly where, we should be coordinating with others to either ward off or find ways to actually coexist or even cooperate with China, I think this is the way that we should be approaching the relationship.
Thank you very much. And Professor Coët, your thoughts on this topic as well, please. Thank you.
Yeah, I think this idea, l'idée de granularité est une excellente idée.
This idea of granularity is a really good idea, and I think it's important to be more present from a diplomatic point of view, but also from a research point of view, maybe by having researchers in residence in different embassies and consulates for Canada to make the most so they can benefit from Canadian experience, and these researchers could then go and give talks in the embassies, because the region is a very complex one. We've already mentioned this, and I think it's also important to underline the fact that these researchers and think tanks in the region need support. They have a high level of expertise and competency, and this needs to be reciprocal. What I mean when I say reciprocal, last year there was a grant available for Canadian students to go and into the region to do research. That was for PhD students, but afterwards there was a project called Collectivity, which was to be developed in order to exchange between the different students and enable these other students to come to Canada to benefit from it. This was given up for financial reasons, but it's the type of initiative that's very interesting, and this exchange should be based on that type of initiative. Thirdly, I think that high-level delegations are important, but I would World Global Affairs Canada to maybe create something similar to what was done on the China Research Centre, to have a research centre for the Indo-Pacific region. Developing in-house capacity would be a good idea, and maybe thinking about ad hoc missions with middle-range civil servants or public servants, not high-level public servants, but medium-level ones, to create a form of understanding, because, of course, this understanding is encouraged by the high public servants, and they're the ones who make the proposals. So encourage maybe these links between decision makers and representatives in the region. And this is an initiative that would improve things and provide more expertise and competency and granularity.
It's more than I thought. It's a gift. Thank
The
you,
chair
Mr.
is using his discretion.
He's rather
As
generous.
The first round was 7.5 minutes. So go ahead.
Well, thank you. Thank you for your fairness on the matter. I appreciate those comments very much. I think sometimes, when we talk about these issues, we gravitate towards issues of hard power, whether that might be military or geopolitics or security or energy. But soft power, obviously, should never be underestimated, and I think those are excellent points there. Professor Martel, you mentioned in your opening statement an area of opportunity work related to the agenda of women, peace, and security. I just wonder if in the minute or so we have remaining, if you could give us your thoughts on that and why you see that as an area of potential.
I would start by saying it's an area of demonstrated potential in the sense that Canada has been an active player in that space as part of the Indo-Pacific strategy, and has been very, very active in supporting ASEAN's efforts, in particular to develop its own regional action plan on women, peace, and security. And ASEAN was late to the party when it comes to women, peace, and security, but has now caught up and is really, this is kind of an ongoing trend that we're seeing, and one that offers a number of very interesting entry points for Canada across issue areas where we already provide contributions that are not specific to having that kind of gender lens on issues. So all the issues I've mentioned, from dark detection, of dark vessel detection, to disaster relief, to countering violent extremism, all of those can use kind of a women, peace, and security entry point that is, still, despite what we're seeing from our southern neighbor, the United States pulling out of that space and deeming that kind of policy agenda to be controversial, the U.S. is an outlier still.
Thank you. Thank you. Monsieur Brunel de Sepp, vous avez 7 minutes.
Mr. Brunel de Sepp, you have 7.5 minutes. Yes, thank you very much, Chair, and thank you to our witnesses for being here. It's a very important piece of research. Mr. Cahouet, your title as Professor of Southeast Asian Studies, you know, for example, what's happening in Tibet or in Xinjiang or in Hong Kong or Taiwan. I imagine you're also aware of what's happening in these areas of the world. And I'm just wondering about this. You said we need to reinvent our relationship with China. How will Canada defend both international rights of people and international law based on very precise regulations and rules, and also get closer diplomatically and economically to China? I'm intrigued by what you can say about this. That's a very good question, which is relevant with China and also with Myanmar, in countries where they have a lot of issues with human rights. And I think that the idea would be to generate a dialogue, a discussion on these topics. And one of the obstacles for Canada for many years was the idea that Canada was actually just out there giving lessons to everyone. And China was constantly highlighting the fact that relationships with Canada were not necessarily good ones because of their relationship with indigenous populations. So we may be able to use the idea of reconciliation to create these areas of where things go well. I don't think there's an easy solution to this, but I think it would be important to have a constant position for Canada. Canada needs to meet its commitments, but also create these areas to discuss things and in a different way from what used to happen in the past. Well, are you echoing the arguments of China in relation to our relationship with First Nations? So what happened in the indigenous past, in the past of the indigenous people, was dreadful. Now there is the process of truth and reconciliation. So China at the moment is currently inflicting the same thing that Canada inflicted on First Nations a few years ago. They're doing it on the Tibetans and the Uyghurs, and it's happening right now. So when we mirror this argument, or we talk about this argument and bring it up, it's sort of a way of, falling into a trap, really, and not going to. I don't want to, counteract what you're saying, but we're not lesson givers. It's actually happening at the moment in China. We've actually set up mechanisms for truth and reconciliation. So we can't go down that rabbit hole. Well, what I was saying is that we really, rather than giving lessons, we really ought to use our experience and demonstrate how we did things and how we dealt with these issues through truth and reconciliation, through the research processes. And we need something more constructive, and that's where we can be really committed. And another element we didn't talk about is expertise from regional civil society in Canada, and they go into the more difficult regions. So, for example, in areas of China, it's important to be very aware of what human rights groups are saying and highlight these elements in reports and use the exercises carried out to inform ourselves. Often people from the embassies don't want to go in regions where there are conflicts and they don't have any direct links. So why not use the expertise of people who have been in the diaspora? We're talking about 9 million members or Canadians who have come from diaspora from the region. So an idea of consultation commitment through fora and other initiatives would lead to consensus, and this type of consensus or dialogue would be carried out behind closed doors, and they would enable us to discuss all of these issues. I think we need to be steadfast, and we need to, as regards the basic principles of human rights. But in order to do this, I think we need to find better ways of doing it, and also do it in line with the political views as well, and political stance. Well, since the hotting up of the agreements, for example, there's the electric vehicle agreement, and what we've seen is that Mr. Carney has brought Liberal MPs back from Taiwan. We've seen here in Canada, we've seen the Chinese community saying that it was not a good idea to send MPs to Taiwan. And in fact, Mr. Chong, our MP, I would like to thank her and congratulate her, did not actually listen to this directive, as if we were being told what to do by the Communist Party here on Canadian soil, the Chinese Communist Party. And since this hotting up of the situation, we've had no results at the moment. But if we look in history, where we've been diplomatically close to China and where we've obtained better results in terms of human rights, Tibet in 1949. That's been, things have been tricky or difficult and terrible since then. And we're talking about if we get economically and politically closer to China. You talked about Myanmar, but between Myanmar and China, there's a whole world. We're talking about a world power that is on an equal footing with the United States, whereas Myanmar is not at all a big player. So it begs the question, I'm trying to understand how we can truly get close to a system, a regime, which at the moment, and we all know this, is using forced labor through supply chains where they supply goods available here in Canada, whilst saying, well, if we get close to them, they're going to change their behavior. We've never had any results up until now, so I don't really understand how we can base ourselves on this affirmation and think that things are going to change at all. So very quickly, please, very quick answer. Well, I think that this is a valid argument, but I think that it's important to keep a firm position. And what is lacking in Canada is that Canada seems to be making concessions on its principles. So when we take a stance and then we change it, for example, on Taiwan, following Mr. Carney's visit, we seem to want to distance ourselves from it. And I've been through this. We had a conference where we had invited representatives from Taiwan, and China reacted very strongly by saying that the person should not come. And so this showed that the lack of independence of the academic world. And I think that I don't think it's a tenable position that's going to lead to change. And that's why I'm talking about doing as much research as possible to be able to do this.
Mr. Gill?
Thank you, Chair. A question for Dr. Martel. India clearly is a very important player in the Indo-Pacific and an important country for Canada's future and economic interests. What many Canadians are struggling to understand, though, is how the government reconciles the reality regarding concerns by, various concerns have been raised by parliamentary committees here, CSIS, the RCMP, former ministers, and even members of the government's own caucus regarding foreign interference. We have seen diplomatic visits, ministerial meetings, partnership announcements, MOUs, in an effort to normalize relationships. Those efforts are clearly worthwhile and necessary, but beyond the optics and beyond the diplomacy, what problem has actually been solved? So, academically speaking, what concern identified by CSIS, the RCMP, Parliament, or the government members themselves is less serious today than it was a year ago?
So to be perfectly frank with you, this is far outside the scope of my expertise, so I will not be able to provide a direct answer. What I will say is, and to go back also to the previous line of questioning, is I think, there is a need to grasp with the reality of the interconnectedness of our global economy with China, with India, in ways that means that any attempt to decouple because of concerns that are legitimate on foreign interference, on human rights, are not realistic. So we need to find other ways to be able to pressure. And those ways are best handled oftentimes away, as my colleague mentioned, from, the megaphone diplomacy and moral outrage that makes us feel good, but actually achieves very little results. So I would, defer to the expertise of the agencies in question to actually do the work that needs to be done. And be able to build the safeguards and where we can build them and make objective calculations of risk here. And I think we do have the capacity to do that. I think, unfortunately, there is a whole lot of noise that is also crowding our ability to distinguish facts from speculation, from fear of what might, happen. And I think here, what is absolutely crucial is also to be able, and thank you for bringing up the case of India, because that's allowing me to make that point about China as well, is we need to really contextualize the kind of behavior that we don't, necessarily, approve of against the backdrop of other relationships that we have that are, also problematic in those ways, but that we don't talk about and don't lead to the same kind of outrage. And I find that kind of, distinction, telling, and is something that also opens up additional or gives additional fodder for states like China to use the kind of, tactical whataboutism, to undermine our attempts to build those safeguards. So I think if we're able to accommodate the fact that, yes, reality is complex, that two things can be true at the same time, and ward ourselves against, confirmation bias, I think that's the right way to go.
Thank you, Dr. Martel. I think what I heard there was not stand in Parliament, unlike the previous Prime Minister, and make wild statements that cannot be backed up. Dr. Cowett, the original Indo-Pacific strategy described China as an increasingly disruptive global power. And the Prime Minister called China a threat while visiting my home city of Windsor in April 2025. Now he has changed his tune and has called them a strategic and reliable partner, possibly even more reliable than the U.S. We also heard from the Liberal government and the RCMP in the past that Beijing-sanctioned police stations are operating in major Canadian cities. How does this government balance these competing realities, and what safeguards are there to ensure that today's re-engagement does not become tomorrow's problems for Canadian citizens?
Thank you, Mr. Harb. Unfortunately, we're out of time for that round, so that'll have the witnesses could, if they wish, could answer that as part of subsequent rounds. We'll now go to Madame Fortier for 5 minutes.
Well, I have questions. Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you very much for being part of this research that we're carrying out. And with your expertise, your knowledge, we're trying to see how we can strengthen the strategy and how we can improve it. So I'm going to give you an opportunity to add information to concrete actions that you may wish to share with us. Canada provide its candidature for the ASEAN Summit in 2029. I wanted your opinion on this. Do you think it's worthwhile and justified? And what could we make of this occasion that could happen in 2029 in order to continue working on our strategy? I'll start with Professor Martel and then Professor Cowett, please. Thank you. You're talking about the Regional ASEAN Forum, the one we're going to be welcoming in Canada in 2029. Minister Anand is trying to show that Canada wishes to play a real role in the Indo-Pacific region, and it's a good occasion for partners from ASEAN to take part in it. It was also a good occasion for you to tell us how we could improve our Indo-Pacific strategy before this event that would be happening in 2029. Well, I think that any type of event is good. Is a good time for Canada to offer a certain amount of reciprocity. We can raise our flag high up there, and we can also act as a platform and welcome high-level discussions and debates on various topics. And I think that what could be interesting with these talks, and we may not have talked about this up until now, which might be a lead-up event or lead up towards this type of event, well, is to encourage more informal channels of expert diplomatic relations. These are channels that Canada has access to, but that Canada does not necessarily use as much as it used in the past for many reasons. The Indo-Pacific strategy, thankfully, has contributed to relaunching this and giving a new life to this, a new lease of life to these types of discussions. So the participation in the forum, the Indo-Pacific Forum, was very, it saw a good turnout, and I think that this needs to be taken more seriously by Ottawa. Having taken part in various of these events, I see that there are a lot of links that really show how serious Canada is and how it's very able to contribute constructively in these talks in key areas. And a lot of these efforts are down to the goodwill of researchers and people who have been working on developing them. So, Professor Cahouette, do you have anything to add? Thank you. Yes, I do. Well, I think that even this year we have the Francophone Summit that's happening in Cambodia this year. It's important to know this and to be there. We need to be there. And I think it's a very good way of demonstrating our commitment and engagement. And to come back to what my colleague just said, I believe that Canada, for the past few years, has been able to set up coalitions. So, for example, on anti-personnel mines, the Blue Helmets went a bit further than this, but Canada was able to work with like-minded countries on coalitions to have the power to do certain things. And so I think that strengthening trade and relations with Southeast Asia could create this power link with China. And so in the scale of things, if Canada were to develop anything, why only use supply chains with China? Why not develop something else? So it goes beyond. So creating these coalitions could be interesting, and if we think about it a lot, it could be something quite normal to do. So the question of human rights, this may be a way of fighting for the cause of human rights, and it also means that it might create a space to talk about this. There's another question, the question of critical minerals, and that's the next strategy on which we'll have to be working and thinking about. Of course, critical minerals are deemed to be part of the environmental green transition, but often all of the efforts carried out ahead of all this, such as population transfers of population and pollution. Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Well, it's a very interesting discussion, Mr. Brunel de Sepp. I would like to thank our witnesses today, Mrs. Martel, the subcommittee for international rights of the person the House of Commons published a report that there had been a genocide against the Uyghurs and that the people responsible was the regime in power. In 2021, my honourable colleague, Mr. Chong, who's the chair here, got a motion voted by the House of Commons, and the House of Commons recognised the Uyghur genocide by the communist regime of China. And then after that, there are still deputies under sanctions. Mr. Chong, myself, Mrs. Vandenberg, we're under sanction from China. And I just can't get this in my head. With all of the information that we have available, it's as if we were having to deal to sort of accept everything, despite the fact that there are violations of certain aspects, for example, even related to the Geneva Convention. So I understand that we continue to have diplomatic relations with this country, but this country has not changed anything. So how do we do things, Mrs. Martel, to manage this relationship with China? You don't have to give me the big answer. I don't think it really exists, but you can tell us what you think about it. Well, that's an easy question, isn't it? So let me turn the question back on you. How do you, or how would you foresee a foreign policy approach or a foreign trade approach that would encourage, if I understand, a form of decoupling or no relations with a regime, we're not necessarily talking about China. There are a whole load of countries or with regimes with which we have commercial or diplomatic relations that have ended up being caught out for, serious violations of human rights. So would the implications be that since a commitment is not obtained by Canada, I think we need to be realistic about the self-proclaimed medium-sized power of Canada on China. Does it mean we can't put pressure on in an efficient way? So unless we really want to deal with our foreign policy in general by putting forward our human relations ideology and say that we're not going to do any business with anyone who is violating human rights. Thank you very much, Mrs. Martel. Mrs. Rood?
Here today. The Asia Pacific Foundation has stated that Canada needs to update its China policy with real guardrails on foreign interference, supply chains, and economic coercion instead of just selective engagement. Do you believe the current Liberal approach is actually protecting Canadian jobs, farmers, and national security, or is it still being too soft on Beijing?
That's a question for me. I'm sorry, or Dr.
Sure, both of you.
So again, like situating the narrow scope of my expertise, which is not on trade and not on China. I will say that I don't think the current approach is too soft on China. That wouldn't be the kind of language that I would personally use. I think there is room for building the kind of granular country-specific knowledge and distinguishing the facts and the legitimate cause of concern from the noise in how we approach our relationship moving forward, and also not losing track of realistic expectations on what kind of influence that Canada can exercise on China, and how technically we can also build the safeguards that we need to be building, while understanding the reality that of China's centrality in the global economy. So I think there is a way to approach things
Thank you
with
so
cooler
much.
heads when it comes to our relationship.
I'm just going to move on to the next question because time is very short here. Taiwan is a vibrant democracy and a critical partner for semiconductors, cybersecurity, and supply chain resilience. Other witnesses have stated that we should deepen ties with Taiwan and not treat it as a bargaining chip with China. Do you agree that Canada should sign the trade facilitation deal, keep doing straight transits with allies, and expand tech and defense cooperation right now, regardless of what Beijing thinks?
If I go, I think this is one of the key points I want to say, that Canada has to show that is an independent foreign policy. I think the tendency sometimes is like we were saying China is a disruptive policy country, as a nation, and then we're saying that now it can be a strategic partner. I think we don't gain anything by creating these narratives that are polarizing. I think one way to demonstrate our independence is to maintain links with Taiwan. As I said before, it's also important that these links would be part of a regional approach, and there are countries such as Japan, Korea, countries in Southeast Asia that also value this relationship. I think it's important to show China, for that matter, or that Canada can build alliance, maintain an independent foreign policy. I think what has to be outlined, one way of doing it is through trade, and often we forget there's 23 flights every day from Taiwan to China, and there's a lot of investment of Taiwanese businesses in China. So it's important to have a complex understanding. The reality is complex, but I think Canada gains by having a foreign policy, a new revised Indo-Pacific strategy that maintains some consistency on the way it characterizes its relation, and by that approach, and use a language that is not setting Canada into a rhetorical trap, so that after that people can say, but Canada said such a thing. So I think this is what I was saying earlier in terms of for the next strategy to have a more nuanced, but also more specialized and a better knowledge of the region. I think the Asia Pacific Foundation is doing.
I'm going to move on to my next question.
Work.
We're just about out of time. I'm so sorry. Canada has LNG, uranium, critical minerals, and clean tech resources that Indo-Pacific countries desperately need for their energy security. And many call energy a strategic asset, not just a commercial one. Should the next phase of the Indo-Pacific strategy make exporting reliable Canadian oil and gas and minerals the top priority to strengthen our economy at home and influence abroad?
Madame Brode, who would you like to answer that question?
He can continue on.
Okay, Monsieur Couette, brièvement, s'il vous plaît.
I was let Stephanie to go ahead.
Okay, Madame Martel, brièvement, s'il vous plaît, briefly.
I think that beyond short-term trade-focused, priorities on, and exports, Canada has other ways to contribute that should not be downgraded or sidelined.
And just to add, I think.
Yeah, go ahead, Monsieur Couette.
Very quickly, I think the way we frame the issues, either or is not productive, because I think it forces Canada to put itself in contradictory policy. So we want to fight climate change, we want to have environmental policies, and yet we want to increase fossil energy, and then people say this cannot be reconciled. So I think avoiding these binary concepts or ideas it would benefit Canada, because in many ways, Stephanie Martel is a specialist, ASEAN functioned by this non-confrontational way, and it has kept the organization going. So I think it's key to learn from the region.
Thank you. The last round goes to Mr. Oliphant.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you to both the witnesses. Just before we continue, Madame Forte asked me to make sure, correct the record. She had mentioned that we are looking at hosting the ASEAN Summit in 2020. It's the APEC. And just I think it's important for us to remember that ASEAN is 11 countries, whereas APEC is 21 economies, and so that's a really pretty important group which brings together the economies of the Pacific, which include Taiwan, and that's why it's referred to as the economies. A couple of things I want to dig down on. Professor Martel, you're giving us a high challenge because it's always easier to be generalists than to be specific. I'm looking at you up there because that's where your picture is for me. The Indo-Pacific strategy, which had 17 departments and agencies, was high level, and it does end up leading, when we don't get specific, to sort of some in and out thinking. You've asked us to be more specific about where we do our work, and even not just sectorally specific, but digging down within sectors very strategically. I agree. I think it's really important to try to deal with 40 countries in that region. Indo-Pacific is hard to do, and then you get into hundreds of sectors. How do we do that? How do we actually get the intelligence, the work done? And I guess what I want you to say, without putting words in your mouth, is we need a larger foreign service that is able to actually be on the ground and out there gathering the information to be very specific about where we should be. Not wanting to put words in your mouth, but trying to get that out.
Absolutely. I think we have a significantly, highly competent foreign service deployed across this region that operate with very, very limited resources. And the Indo-Pacific strategy has, to an extent, contributed to, additional support, new positions in some aspects. But I think this is absolutely crucial if we are serious in the long term to have those ears on the ground. Absolutely. I will say that ears on the ground can also be a whole of society effort, and one that goes beyond trade missions. And I think this is where my initial suggestion of leveraging people-to-people ties in the higher education sector, but also leveraging the expert capacity that we have in Canada in ways that are more effective is also a very cost-effective way of showing the flag in various areas and keeping ears on the ground and getting a sense of where the wind is blowing at particular moments.
I guess I would add to that we are in a number of clubs that can engage in a way. The Comprehensive Progressive Trade Agreement, CPTPP, is 12 partners. People forget that of the 40 countries in Asia, Indo-Pacific region, 21 are members of the Commonwealth. 21, over half. 3 are members of La Francophonie. So you start to put these groups together and you realize that we have other multilateral vehicles for us to engage diplomatically, as well as culturally and people-to-people ties through a variety of funds that I think we often forget that we're able to do that. Next point, I want to go a little bit, I want to talk to India, and it may not be either of your expertise. Recently, the president of Finland was in India, and he said that together, Finland and India make up 1.5 billion people. It was a little bit of a joke. But together, Canada and India make up 1.5 billion people as well. And so India is absolutely critical as the most populous country in the world. And any thoughts on our new engagement with India, opportunities, cautions, guardrails, anything that comes into either of your minds? And perhaps we could go with Professor Cowett first, if he has anything.
Very briefly, because we need to move on to our next panel. Go ahead, Mr. Cowett.
Yeah, I think with India is a continent in itself. And so I think one of the things we could do is to work with regional government as opposed to national government. So that would allow us to have an approach that is more sophisticated, because there's quite a variety. And oftentimes we talk of India as a whole. India is very complex, and society is very different from the north from the south. I think we need to reinforce our expertise on India. I think it's also key. It was the 2 pillars was India and China. now relations have been reestablished, but doesn't mean that the regime have necessarily changed. I think beyond reinforcing foreign services, which I totally agree with my colleague, that is important. I think we should have an approach that takes into account the NGO roles of civil society, but also I would say the Young Chamber of Commerce, like throughout Canada, you have the Young Japanese Chamber of Commerce, you have the Young Vietnamese Chamber of Commerce. I think it's very important that we work with our diaspora, but also the new generation of Asian descent Canadian, and these can be very effective ambassador for Canada as well.
Okay,
And
thank you. Yeah, go ahead quickly.
Cultural and I say also cultural industries. And beside university, I think cultural industries, this is one of the expertise of Canada. I think we could strengthen that sector, cultural relation with the region.
Thank you very much. I appreciate both of your witness testimony today. I'm sure it will be incorporated into our study. Thank you very much for your interventions today, members of the committee. Without further ado, we will suspend for a few minutes to allow our next panel of witnesses to appear. The meeting is suspended. Standing Committee on Foreign Affairs and International Development. We're here to study under Standing Order 108-2 to study the security situation in the Balkans. I would like to thank our three witnesses for appearing. We have Dr. Mlađenović, who's the Advisory Council member of the Nationhood Lab at the Pell Center, Salve Regina University, and Dr. Maria Popova, the Hiram Mills Chair and Associate Professor, Department of Political Science at McGill University, and we have Joanne Bishop, representative in Bosnia and Herzegovina. So thank you all for appearing. We'll begin with an opening statement from Dr. Mlađenović. You have 5 minutes for your opening statement.
Thank you very much. Honorable members, the overall security dynamics in the Western Balkans are moving in the wrong direction and have been for more than a decade. This concerns Canada because His Majesty's government has a vested interest in the stability of Europe and in demonstrating Canada's burden sharing and energy capacities to its European allies. The chief threats to regional security are a combination of factors which have remained largely unaltered since the 1990s. Revanchist ambitions in Belgrade and Zagreb, which undermine the sovereignty and territorial integrity of vulnerable neighboring democracies, and an overall international posture of indifference to Western Balkan affairs. In the 1990s, divergent views within the Atlantic community delayed action to prevent the first systematic crimes against humanity and genocide in Europe since the Holocaust, most infamously during the aggression against Bosnia and Herzegovina. Today, it is not merely fractures within the democratic West which undermine the Euro-Atlantic agenda in the region. It is also the strident and expanding influence of China and Russia, too. During his recent visit to Beijing, Serbia's President Aleksandar Vučić, whose government has engaged in large-scale election fraud and has actively suppressed peaceful anti-government protests for nearly 2 years, received from Xi Jinping the Friendship Medal of the People's Republic of China, an award reserved for the CCP's closest allies. This comes after large-scale weapons transfers to Serbia from China, including sophisticated missile and drone systems, and as Chinese-manufactured facial recognition software has been deployed on the streets of the Serbian capital with successive tours of Chinese police patrols. Nor has Serbia's acquisition of modern Chinese military equipment, along with similar systems from Russia, sat dormant. In September 2023, a group of 80-plus Serbian paramilitaries with direct links to the most senior levels of the Belgrade government attempted to seize strategic sites in Kosovo's north with approximately €5 million worth of heavy-caliber Serbian origin arms. The operation was clearly modeled on similar actions by Belgrade and Croatia and Bosnia during the 90s. Local law enforcement intercepted them, and a day-long firefight erupted, which left 1 Kosovo police officer and 3 Serbian militants dead. Simultaneously, Belgrade maintains, along with the Kremlin, remains the chief international backer of the secessionist regime in Bosnia's Republika Srpska entity. Milorad Dodik, the longtime nationalist strongman who presides over the RS regime, despite having been formally removed from office by the court of Bosnia-Herzegovina, threatens the territorial integrity of the Bosnian state and the Dayton Peace Agreement on a near-daily basis. In May, he twice visited Moscow to meet with senior Russian officials to solicit support for this dangerous agenda. Despite more than 2 decades of attacks on the single most significant diplomatic pillar of the post-Yugoslav era in the region, the Dayton Peace Agreement, the U.S. decided to lift virtually its entire sanctions regime against Mr. Dodik and his retinue in October of 2025, with little coherent public justification. Regional observers, however, claimed that Dodik secured this major American policy shift, which has also apparently involved the U.S. effort to push out Christian Schmidt as Bosnia's high representative by spending millions of dollars retaining the services of far-right lobbyists and other hard-right influencers in Washington. Mr. Dodik also has important European friends. The former Orban government was arguably his chief EU benefactor, explicitly blocking Brussels from imposing sanctions against him and his inner circle. Although Budapest is now expected to shift its Bosnia policy, there has been no movement on the EU sanctions file, largely because Dodik also enjoys the protection of Croatia. Zagreb backs him because of his decades-long partnership with the HDZ-BIH, the Bosnian-based Croat nationalist sister party of Croatia's governing HDZ, and because both he and the HDZ-BIH are central to preventing the reform of Bosnia's constitution in line with the binding rulings of the European Court of Human Rights and the opinions of the Venice Commission. Thus, although Croatia claims to support Bosnia's entry into the EU and NATO, it opposes nearly every reform needed to realize those objectives. In conclusion, as Canada looks to deepen its relations with the EU, the Western Balkans are perhaps the most obvious region in Europe for Ottawa to demonstrate the meaning of what Prime Minister Carney has called variable geometry, the formation of ad hoc coalitions to defend peace and order and aid in the construction of good government. While Kosovo and Bosnia may benefit most from a Canada that seeks to prove that pluralism works, its net benefits would be felt across the region, including in states like Serbia, which has struggled to throw off the yoke of despotism, and Montenegro, which hopes to overcome entrenched political skepticism at home and in several European capitals to become the 28th member of the EU before the decade's close. Thank you, and I invite your questions.
Thank you very much.
Point d'ordre, Monsieur le Président.
Yes?
Juste rappeler aux témoins peut-être de...
Mr. Chair, could we ask the witnesses to read their speech as not so fast, because it's very difficult for the interpreters to follow and they need to be able to breathe. Please think about the employees in the House who are trying to do their work as best they can. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for convening this session, for inviting me to appear here, because the other two witnesses are specialists on the Western Balkans. I will focus on the other Balkan countries that are members of NATO. And I want to talk today about the security and political stability challenges on NATO's southeastern flank. There are three primary challenges to security and democratic stability among the Balkan NATO members. The first one is kinetic spillover from Russia's war against Ukraine. The second is persistent Russian hybrid warfare. And the third one is domestic political instability, which is fueled by a hypersensitive public that distrusts institutions. And I want to discuss all three in a bit more detail. First, the kinetic threat and strategic testing that Russia is doing. The security threat from Russia is really acute in the Balkans. Regular Russian drone incursions into Romanian airspace, they have escalated in the last few months. Most recently, Russian drones struck a residential area in the Romanian city of Galați. This is not mere Russian carelessness. These are deliberate tests of NATO resolve. They're designed to trigger or to deepen divisions among the allies on how to respond. In addition, there are floating naval mines in the Black Sea that consistently jeopardize Bulgarian and Turkish Black Sea shipping lanes, which are also used by Russia's shadow fleet. So the danger of NATO not responding to this Russian escalation is that Russia may move on to targeting logistics networks that support Ukraine's war effort in the Balkans. A decisive, unified NATO deterrent is crucial here. The good news here is that the Balkan NATO members have all increased their defense spending. They're committed NATO allies. The private defense sector in Bulgaria, in Romania, in Turkey is actively producing and also striking joint ventures with the burgeoning and improving Ukrainian defense sector. This is a source of strength for the NATO alliance. The second threat is persistent hybrid interference and warfare from Russia. Russian hybrid warfare in the form of cyber attacks, disinformation, in the form of financial backing for pro-Russian parties. This has low structural costs because it avoids traditional tit-for-tat military responses. So Russia is going to keep doing this. So countering it requires vigilance and it requires proactive policies by these countries. The institutional response to this in the Balkans is somewhat mixed. On the one hand, Romania's judiciary reacted in a very proactive way when it became clear that a candidate in the presidential election in 2024 benefited enormously from targeted Russian disinformation. That candidate was taken down from the runoff. And in this way, Romania avoided having a far-right pro-Russian president. On the other hand, though, this spring, Bulgaria became a bit more vulnerable. The winner of the April parliamentary elections, a brand new party called somewhat oxymoronically, because these are not its policies, Progressive Bulgaria, has a Russia accommodationist foreign and energy policy, and the new government has already started creating opportunities for Russian soft power expansion into Bulgaria. Eventually, not yet, but eventually the Bulgarian government may pursue Orban-style obstructionism at the EU level.
Okay,
Now, the
please
third-
wrap up quickly so we can get to our next witness.
The third issue is the hyper-mobilization around issues of corruption. There are very often major and destabilizing protests in the Balkans over corruption, even though sometimes these seem like more trivial issues that trigger it. So this is something for Canada to keep in mind. There's actually a lot of variation in the region in terms of corruption. Not all the countries in the region are endemically corrupt, so we need to avoid the catch-all stereotype of fragile new democracies and be attuned to the variation and the diversity here. And I'm happy to talk more about this in the question and answer. I think I slowed down a little bit too much.
Thank you very much for the opening statement. Madame Bishop, you have the floor for 5 minutes for your opening statement.
Chair, honorable members of the committee, thank you for the invitation to join this session. I'm speaking on behalf of UN Women as country representative in Bosnia and Herzegovina. Allow me first to begin on a personal note. I started my career in Bosnia and Herzegovina under a Canadian-funded program for young professionals. That experience, seeing both the human cost of conflict and the leadership of women rebuilding communities, continues to shape how I understand security and stability today. More than 3 decades after the breakup of Yugoslavia, peace in the Western Balkans has held, but it's not yet consolidated. Across the region, unresolved political, social, and justice issues continue to weaken democratic resilience and long-term stability. In Bosnia and Herzegovina, 30 years after the Dayton Peace Agreement, this is reflected in the lasting legacies of war: displacement, trauma, contested narratives, and conflict-related sexual violence, which continue to shape trust in institutions and inter-community relations. Stability is not only about preventing conflict, it depends on institutional accountability, protection from violence, economic inclusion, civic space, and meaningful participation in public life. Without these, trust erodes and peace remains fragile. This is why sustained international engagement matters. Canada has been a key partner through the UN Peacebuilding Fund, including dedicated women, peace, and security investments. Canada is supporting women's leadership, community peacebuilding, and responses to emerging risks, such as gendered hate speech. In Bosnia and Herzegovina, transitional justice remains a critical gap. Survivors of conflict-related sexual violence continue to face stigma and barriers to services and reparations. In a recent meeting I had with survivors, they shared a clear message for the international community: do not forget us. From a security perspective, violence against women is not a secondary issue. During the war, it was used as a weapon. Today, it persists as domestic violence, economic exclusion, online abuse, and political intimidation. These are not isolated incidents. They reflect structural inequalities, unequal power relations, and gaps in accountability. When such violence persists, it undermines trust in institutions and weakens social cohesion. This is why addressing violence against women must be understood as a core component of security. This is especially visible in political life. Women in Bosnia and Herzegovina hold only 19.7% of parliamentary seats, while 60% of women in politics report experiencing violence, particularly online violence. This deters participation, narrows democratic space, and weakens institutional legitimacy, especially ahead of the upcoming general elections in October. At the same time, women, especially survivors in civil society, are central to sustaining peace and security. The women of Bosnia and Herzegovina did not wait to be included. They organized, advocated, and bore witness, helping to lay the foundations for the global women, peace, and security agenda. Today, they continue to rebuild trust and maintain dialogue across divides, yet remain underfunded and unrepresented in decision-making. Targeted peacebuilding investments help close this gap. Supporting these actors strengthens social cohesion and acts as a frontline mechanism for conflict prevention. Across the Western Balkans, the pattern is similar. Unfinished reconciliation, contested narratives, unresolved political questions, and low trust in institutions, combined with the continued exclusion of women from political and security decision-making. The Belgrade-Pristina dialogue remains central to regional stability, and the Women's Advisory Platform, supported by the EU and UN Women, will help ensure that women's expertise is systematically included after years of advocacy. Looking ahead, the next phase of women, peace, and security engagement must go beyond commitments and invest in conditions for meaningful participation, including predictable financing, protected civic space, survivor-centered justice, intergenerational dialogue, and stronger links between policy commitments and budgets. For Canada, the implication is clear. Continued support to women, peace, and security in the Western Balkans is not only principled, it's a strategic investment in conflict prevention, reconciliation, and democratic resilience. I thank you and look forward to your questions.
Thank you very much, Madame Bishop. We'll now have 30 or so minutes of questions and comments from members, beginning with Madame Brood.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you very much, witnesses, for being here today. I'll start with you, Dr. Mrnjavčević. The U.S. lifted sanctions on some Bosnian Serb leaders last year, while the U.K. kept theirs. Canada still has no sanctions on anyone undermining the Dayton Agreement. In your view, are sanctions an effective tool to stop secessionist threats and Russian-backed destabilization in Bosnia, or have they become meaningless without full partner cooperation?
Thank you for the question. I maintain that sanctions are an extremely important tool that the international community can use to prevent the worst kind of behavior. And we know that from the very same people who were under sanctions, right? So Mr. Dodik, by his own admission, has spent upwards of 40 to 50 million US dollars trying to get sanctions lifted from the United States. He ultimately, unfortunately, succeeded in that effort. But it's absolutely an issue that is going to remain on the radar in Washington. And even the current administration has been very clear about the fact that they would be willing to reimpose those sanctions if they believe it is necessary. So I would think that greater coordination between Canada and its European allies in particular with respect to sanctions policy would be something that would definitely improve the overall security environment across the Western Balkans, because it's obviously not just Mr. Dodik that warrants looking at in terms of sanctions policy.
Thank you very much. Ethnic tensions, weak institutions, corruption, and organized crime are still tearing at the Balkans, and Russia and China are actively exploiting it. What are the biggest security risks right now, and how can Canada, working with our NATO and EU allies, actually push back against this malign foreign interference instead of just talking about it?
Well, first and foremost, the structural issue is that this is a region that has not been at the forefront of Western foreign policy for a very long time. That has been something that has been recognized by our adversaries. They have come in with a lot of cheap, easy cash. They have bought up enormous amounts of influence. And they have also boxed us out of key projects where countries like Canada, for instance, have a very obvious interest, like the energy sector across southeastern Europe. This is something where Canada has fallen majorly behind countries like China and Russia. I think what needs to happen moving forward is first and foremost that Canada needs to reestablish its diplomatic footprint in the region. Most of the countries in the Western Balkans do not have Canadian embassies on the ground. That includes Bosnia, that includes Kosovo, that includes Albania, that includes Montenegro. It's very hard for Canada to engage in a substantive fashion when it doesn't have sustained diplomatic representation on the ground. Once you have that, then you can actually begin identifying in a more systematic fashion what Canada's own priorities are. As I've said, energy, I think, is the most obvious one for Canada because it's what benefits Canadians the most, but it's also an area where we can definitely work with our European and in particular our British allies, to improve the interconnectedness and interoperability of the region as a whole, including the NATO allies in the area and non-NATO allies, but hopefully soon NATO allies in the region, who, for instance, are have a very robust munitions industry in the region. That is something that Canada can help build up. That's something that Canada can benefit from as Canada looks to improve its industrial military base here. So there's a lot of synergy there. But again, the first step needs to be actually having diplomatic footprint on the ground.
Thank you very much. I'm going to cede the rest of my time to Mr. Gill.
Mr. Majanovic, despite years of dialogue between Kosovo and Serbia, there's still serious issues between them. And how do we get past those issues to lasting normalization? Are we any closer since we've been over the past 5 years to that?
We're not, unfortunately, and that has largely to do with the recalcitrant attitudes in Belgrade. I spoke about the Banjska incident, so I won't repeat myself there. What I will say in terms of moving the policy framework forward, we've had an excellent suggestion by a representative in the American House of Representatives, Representative Keith Self out of Texas, who has basically suggested that what the U.S., and I think it applies also to Canada, needs to start doing is signaling to the 5 European non-recognizers of Kosovo's sovereignty that this is going to be a bilateral issue between them and the United States, or in this case Canada and them, in so much as they do not move forward on recognition of Kosovo. There is no coherent reason whatsoever why Spain, Slovakia, and others do not recognize Kosovo's sovereignty. And the reason why that matters is because it has artificially emboldened Serbia to completely freeze this dialogue, despite the enormous diplomatic and financial capital that Canada and other countries have put in to normalization.
What can we do to convince these 5 nations then? As Canadians?
I will defer to the government in terms of what sort of strings we can pull, but there are obviously bilateral ties that we have with each of these countries, not least of all at the economic level. It's something that I would, it's going to be purpose fit for each of these countries. Obviously, our relations with, say, a Cyprus are different from a Spain. And I don't think it necessarily means that we need to imperil our relations with Madrid or anyone else. It's just to say that we need to actually make this a topic of conversation and say that Canada does not see why this is something that Spain and others have really dug their heels on.
Thank you very much. We'll now go to Madame Vandenbelt. You have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you to all of our witnesses. I'd like to start my questions with Ms. Bishop, Joanne. I was going to start with women, peace, and security, but you did mention in your opening remarks that your first you got your start internationally through the Youth International Internship Program funded by Canada with OSCE in Bosnia. And the reason I know that is because we were both colleagues as interns at that time in 1999-2000. So that's where we first met. But I want to ask you about that because that was a period where Canada was supporting both youth but also very senior secondments in some of the multilateral institutions like OSCE. You're now with UN Women. Can you tell us why you think it's important for, or if you think it's important for Canada to continue to support Canadians to be within these multilateral institutions in the region?
Thank you, MP Vandenvelde. It's lovely to see you and also to reference back to this start in Bosnia-Herzegovina. So maybe backing up even more. So I was a graduate of the Norman Paterson School of International Affairs. I studied international diplomacy, negotiation, and conflict prevention. And I was interviewing Canadians coming back from the Kosovo verification mission. I was interning at Canadam. And so my path was set where I wanted to go and what I wanted to do. And I was actually seeing the first cadre of Canadians who went before that to Croatia. So for me, the chance to go, and I have to say it was my first time across the Atlantic Ocean. And I showed up in Sarajevo in 1999. And it was an incredible experience to immediately apply all of the knowledge. I worked in the OSCE, so it was a really critical time. I would add that it was a very hopeful time, which is a bit of a shift from the moment now. And there was a lot of opportunity if you were someone that was hardworking and committed and able to really exert a high degree of professionalism. I moved up quickly in the 5 years. I went from a field officer to head of the non-discrimination department in the OSCE. From that, I then moved into ODIHR and set up the tolerance and non-discrimination department, really setting the ground for all of ODIHR's work on hate crimes in the OSCE. And from there, you know, my international career continued with Timor-Leste, Afghanistan, Liberia, etc. So, you know, by creating these opportunities for Canadians out of programs where they have that knowledge that's also grounded in practice through the research that you do, it really creates an opportunity for Canada to be at the forefront of influencing and also applying practices on the ground that work and influencing change and impact. And for me, that's the whole reason why I started international work, because I wanted to see impact and transformation and make a difference in lives. And I think this is the case for many Canadians. And I'm always ready to support other younger Canadians. I wish that the internship program continued, quite frankly, because I know institutions like my own would be very ready to host other young Canadians looking for the same opportunity that I had.
Thank you very much, and I think you have had impact, and we really do need to make those opportunities for younger Canadians today, and all Canadians. But we're very limited for time, and I do want to touch on the women, peace, and security that you mentioned, and link it. I know that in the original Dayton negotiations, women weren't at the table, and you were saying in your opening remarks that women are organically mobilizing. They're not waiting, but they're not being supported. How important is it that women be part of all of these negotiations? But you also talked about, I got some keywords, sustained funding, and you said that Canada had dedicated women, peace, and security investments. I know that the minister is going to reappoint an ambassador for women, peace, and security, but what more can Canada do to support the women in this region and around the world?
Okay, thank you. It's a very important question. Just to go back to your first point on, why women have to be at the table for peace agreements. The data is very clear that peace agreements are 64% less likely to fail when women are involved. And there's a higher chance of lasting more than 15 years. We know, for example, in Kosovo that women were part of, Adita Tahiri was part of the Rambouillet process. She was the only one in that, sea of men in the photo. But for Bosnia and Herzegovina, not. But I have to say that part of the work we are doing that is financed by Canada under the Secretary General's Peace Building Fund has involved, for example, hosting a high-level Women, Peace and Security conference to pay legacy and tribute to the women from this country who, through their lived trauma and experience, they were the ones that shaped UN Security Council Resolution 1325. It was their experience that declared rape a crime against humanity. So these women took the space early on. We know what the situation was of women in Yugoslavia in terms of equality. But after the war, also with PTSD and all of the issues that come after the war, women's political participation has been stagnating. It's actually been decreasing.
Thank you very much.
Yes, okay.
Thank you.
So
Madame Brunel.
Hopefully we'll have a chance to elaborate further later.
Thank you very much. Monsieur Brunel-Duceppe.
Monsieur Brunel-Duceppe. Thank you. Mrs. Bishop, I want to ask you to continue. You were well on your way, and I would like to leave you the opportunity to finish what you were saying. I'm very interested in it.
Can do to support this agenda. So what is very important, so Canada in the past has done a lot, and I want to note that when I spoke about survivors of conflict-related sexual violence, Canada actually was one of the donors early on. to a program that was supporting conflict-related sexual violence survivors early on. This was approximately 10 years ago. Now, through Canada's contribution to the Secretary General's Peacebuilding Fund, it is supporting a number of peacebuilding efforts worldwide. But Bosnia-Herzegovina remains one of the only countries in Europe and Central Asia where there is targeted funding, $20 million of investment in Bosnia-Herzegovina from the Secretary General's Peacebuilding Fund. Canada is the fourth largest donor to that fund. So under that fund, a lot of work's being done. The largest program under the fund is on women, peace, and security. This is a $5 million program, which will be ending soon in early 2027, that is having a huge impact. And with issues regarding challenges with the level of the state and sometimes the rejection of the state. One example of that is the National Action Plan on 1325, which still has not been adopted. Local peacebuilding efforts and engagement of women in advancing inter-community trust is having a huge impact. And we know very often, we know it from the past, that women have a lot of success when it comes to addressing divisive narratives, bringing together communities, and in really advancing social cohesion in their communities. And now we're supporting also with the Peacebuilding Fund. I just met today 20 local women's organizations from the most remote parts of Bosnia-Herzegovina, some who have never received funding, who are now initiating similar activities in their communities to address unmet needs of CRSV survivors and also to support trust building between communities that are still challenged to speak with each other and cooperate and challenged by misinformation and disinformation. So continued funding for work on women, peace and security and programs like this is really critical at this point, as well as the ELSI fund, I would add.
Par contre, Madame, je suis très heureux que vous nous ayez...
I'm very happy to have listened to this and heard this. But Mrs. Bishop, since the arrival of the new government in Canada, there's a new line in terms of funding certain international programs. There have been cuts, major cuts, during the first budget of Prime Minister Khamenei, which followed the same sort of trail as what we've seen in the United States and the budgetary envelopes for international development in the United States. And it's often linked to the fact that we would like to spend more on defense. And we managed to twist this, and we say this for envelopes of money that are aimed at international development, which is a bit strange. Now we can see what's happening in this area, and we're not, unfortunately, not the only ones to do this. Now we have also some questions that have been that were asked to the or set to the Prime Minister. The questions were, "Are you continuing along this line?" And he said it was not the case. So, are there any concerns? Maybe we should be raising the alarm to tell the new government in place in Ottawa that there are concerns on the part of not necessarily your organization, but more local organizations that have less funding and that are more affected by this type of policy.
Are shrinking, especially in the area of Bosnia-Herzegovina, because it is a middle-income country with a very complex context, still requiring investments, as per everything you're discussing now. The investments even to the Peacebuilding Fund have decreased. So also if you look at Canada's contribution year by year, that has dropped. But this is the case pretty much for all governments because of also the global developments, the war in Ukraine, but also I would add gender pushbacks. A lot of our traditional donors that used to support gender equality, women, peace and security are not doing so anymore. And there are a number of them. And this obviously is having an effect on global funds, on funding for women's organizations, women human rights defenders, and so on.
Mais vous dites que c'est un problème global.
You're saying that it's a world problem and that Canada is sort of following this vein. But Canada, we agree, is not a military power, nor is it a world economic power. However, there's background, and I'm an independentist, and so Mr. Mulroney there's been a background, a history of defense of the rights of the person at a time when people are thinning things out. So rather than following this path, maybe we should emerge as a leader and say, well, actually, no, we're going to go against this way of thinking, which is having serious consequences on the field in areas such as the Balkans, for example.
I would just add that Canada has been a leader on women, peace, and security, and this is globally recognized. But the issue of shrinking funding is something that is having a huge impact on women's organizations across a whole range of areas. And it does require those governments that are decreasing, not all governments, of course, some actually are increasing, but those are small in number. But to compensate the decreasing funds, other governments need to continue to step up and to support organizations during this critical time.
Thank you very much. Mr. Aboutieff, you have 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chair, and welcome to all witnesses appearing before our committee today. The Russian presence in the region, in the Balkan region in general, is historic. There's so many ties culturally, economically, security, and otherwise. And if we're to make a quick assessment, Dr. Mijanovic, if we're to do a quick assessment in the last 10 years about Russia's role in the region, I know China is a bigger economic power, and they seem that they're also involved heavily in the region. So I just like a quick assessment, I think will be a benefit to this study.
Question. I know we're very limited on time, and I'll just say that I would be happy to submit a note to the clerk with any additional details regarding many of these issues. The Russian presence in the Western Balkans since 2014, so since the first invasion of Ukraine, has grown by leaps and bounds. Russia has a very sophisticated intelligence footprint on the ground. Just yesterday, we had the news out of Montenegro that the Montenegrin authorities turned back several dozen Serbian nationals who are thought to be linked directly both to Serbian intelligence and Russian intelligence, and they were dispatched on basically a disruption mission for a summit. We know that Serbian nationals have been trained by Russian intelligence. We know that Russian nationals have been trained in Serbia. We have very close ties between the secessionist authorities in Bosnia and Russia. Mr. Dodek, as I said, is actually in St. Petersburg now as we speak for the third time in less than a month and a half. They have influence in Serbia. They have influence in Montenegro. They have influence in North Macedonia. So it's a very, very sophisticated political and intelligence operation on the ground. And the reason why they do this, and this is where I'll end, is they maintain that the Western Balkans are a potential second front against NATO in Europe. The first front being Ukraine, the second front being this region.
Canada has a wonderful rapport in the region since General McKenzie was leading the forces, and his role on making peace in the region is significant. But definitely we don't have, that legacy is still there, but we don't have the same influence as Canada due to the changes that's taken place and the aggressiveness of players such as Russia and China. Now, one thing Canada can do is energy. And we know that LNG could be an item in our hand to be able to have a way to influence in the region. In the meantime, to basically compete with the Russian supply and make their position there uncomfortable. And I know you've written about that somehow, somewhere, which is I would also appreciate, due to the lack of time, if you can submit those statements or those researches to the committee. That would be great to be added to the report. So I'll give you I've got a minute and a half left. If you can comment on this, and then we'll go from there.
Yes, absolutely. So yes, I will certainly submit all of those materials to the clerk. This is a region that is in the process of decoupling from Russian gas dependency. This is because of the EU requirements. The Americans have stepped in and said they want to become the chief LNG provider, not just for the Western Balkans, but essentially all of Eastern Europe. Unfortunately, the way that is being done is very non-transparent, very questionable, and there are, in fact, questions about whether some of these purported companies, and I say purported because they're essentially shell companies, that they may themselves actually actually have ties to other unsavory characters. Let's just put it that way. For Canada, which is such a major LNG producer and is in the process of reinvigorating our relationship with the Europeans as a whole, the Western Balkans are a very logical place where Canadian companies, Canadian industry can do business. I'm not going to tell you that the Western Balkans are, the world's biggest market. They're not, but they are a significant market. And they're a market that would certainly grow in significance with credible, transparent investment. I think it's very logical for Canadian companies to attempt to bid with the support of the Canadian government on some of these projects that are emerging in Bosnia-Herzegovina, in Albania, North Macedonia, and elsewhere.
So what Canada needs to do in that regard? We don't want to be a subcontractor. We want to be a general contractor. We want to be the one who supplied directly to that. So what Canada's government, Canadian government should do to make that competitive edge available for Canadian companies?
First and foremost, it needs to be articulated as a policy priority. It needs to be then articulated through high-level diplomatic engagement. Again, I've spoken about the lack of embassies being a major problem. Then it's actually to speak with these local governments and tell them what Canada can offer in terms of construction of pipelines, in terms of provision of raw materials, LNG and elsewhere. And also the other major thing that needs to be highlighted, this is a region that has recently been recognized for fairly significant critical raw mineral reserves. Again, Canadian mining industry is very logically interested, or could be logically interested, in helping this region build up its capacities. And that, of course, then also speaks to the long-term Euro-Atlantic interests of the region. So in that sense, there's a lot of obvious synergy, but it requires Canada to engage on the issue.
Okay, thank you very much, Mr. Zuberi. You now have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and for witnesses for being here today. I'll start off with Mr. Mujanovic. Thank you so much. Really happy to see you here and for your testimony. We heard a lot of great testimony today and how important the region is. And we also, I would like to recall that Canada had at one point in time put many troops into the region, to the Western Balkans. 40,000 were there. We had 23 lives lost, and we did invest a lot into the region. And now we're talking again today about what we can do in terms of focusing into the future. America has been mentioned. Can you just elaborate a bit upon the U.S. Approach and how it's changed over the last recent years, if you want to just share a bit about that?
Sure. So I think the quickest way to describe it is there is what is official U.S. policy, and then there is what observers are seeing on the ground. And there's a significant decoupling between the two. There was a very significant piece of legislation passed by the U.S. Congress a few months ago called the Western Balkans Democracy and Prosperity Act, which has allowed the U.S. Congress a much greater platform to essentially provide oversight over what the State Department and the administration are doing. We've just had the first of those reports submitted just a couple days ago, and we've had a hearing by Secretary Rubio over the last 2 days that has also given some sense of what the policy of the administration is. And again, the problem is what the administration has been saying and what we've been seeing on the ground are not in line. The most significant policy shift, obviously, was the sanctions relief for Mr. Dodik and the secessionist authorities in BIH, but we've also seen a kind of, I would say, subcontracting out of U.S. policy. So I've mentioned this company that is incorporated in Wyoming as of a few months ago that has been incorporated directly into Bosnian law that is now supposedly going to be building this pipeline. It has no known funds. Its principles are directly tied to some senior political figures.
And what can we here in Canada do to help bolster the situation?
So I think there's two things. One is I think there needs to be Canadian coordination with the European and our British allies, because we're seeing that play out right now, that the Europeans actually are trying to provide a distinct regional policy that the U.S. is pushing back on. We're seeing that right now with the attempted appointment of a new high representative in Bosnia. That's number one. Number two, I think, as we've spoken about a few minutes ago, Canada does actually have a self-interest in the region. It's not just that there are large Western Balkan diaspora communities that have significant economic investments in the region and that they would be interested in seeing, greater engagement by Canada. But again, it's a potential market for Canadian energy firms, Canadian construction firms, and I would also specifically highlight Canadian defense production. Rochelle, which is a APC contractor, APC producer out of Ontario, if I'm not mistaken, has been providing APCs for a number of local governments. This can be built on Canadian industrial presses are being sold in the region, helping munitions firms get off the ground. This is something that Canada can do a lot more of.
Thank you. And now I'll just go to Ms. Bishop, and I really enjoyed hearing your words and hearing how you worked with my colleague, Ms. Vandenbelt, who I've been working with over the last few years now and have learned a lot from. And I picked up on something that you mentioned in your testimony. You said that targeted peace-building investments are important. Do you have any in mind that you'd like to elaborate upon?
I think one of the main ones is the Peace Building Fund. This is a large-scale pooled fund under the Secretary General. So I think sustained investment in that fund and continuing to prioritize the Western Balkans, because there are questions as funds are shrinking about where to invest those decreasing peace-building funds across the UN. And, there are other countries that also are in the midst of conflict or war. So I think building that case, why the continued investment in Bosnia and Herzegovina is important.
And you spoke about multi-year funding. That's quite critical. Would you, quite critical?
That is very, very critical because often there is a tendency towards projectized approaches. And we know that those do not advance system level change.
Certainly.
They often overlap.
And going back to just your personal story, and Anita was sharing her personal story about the youth internship program, Youth International Internship Program, which both of you participated in. How important was that for you personally in terms of what you're doing today as compared to if that did not exist in your current trajectory?
If it didn't exist, I wouldn't be where I am now.
Thank you, Mr. Suberi. Thank you to all of our witnesses for appearing in front of us today. Your testimony has been valuable, and I'm certain will be incorporated into our study as it continues. Members of the committee, thank you very much for your intervention and questions today. Without further ado, this meeting is adjourned.